Yeah, it's fine.
All right. So, I'm sorry, but Jake, I don't actually understand what you did, and that's a little,
I'm not sure I did. Well, first of all, I'm a lawyer, and I've done a lot of things. You're talking about in connection with the Civil Rights Movement in particular. In the 1960s, I did work in 64 and 67. I was in Mississippi. I think you know that things were different down there then. There was strict segregation, Jim Crow laws, the Ku Klux Klan was active, etc. I was at that time a trial lawyer with the U.S. Department of Justice in the Organized Crime Section. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General. There was a program you've probably heard about 50 years ago called Freedom Summit, where about 1,000 students were trained to go down to Mississippi and organize voting for black people, voter registration for black people. Well, in Mississippi at that time, the attitude was probably best demonstrated by a year before in Greenville in the Delta, where a black man went to the courthouse and got an application, just picked up an application to register to vote. And by sundown, he was shotgunned to death. Blacks didn't vote in Mississippi. There were a few token blacks registered, but they didn't vote. Just part of the Jim Crow atmosphere was that they had no power and they dare not vote, and the white majority enforced it ruthlessly. In the freedom, I may as well tell the story. I'm not sure how the time works, and I don't want to take too much time. But Freedom Summer was an organization of some 1,000 students who were to go down to Mississippi in the Deep South and to organize black people to register to vote. They were trained in Ohio. And there was a lot of pressure, a lot of high spirit among the public that blacks were badly treated in the South and that should change. Well, voting rights was the critical thing. It wasn't a matter of who drank from what water fountain. It was a matter of who could vote, because that's where power was. And that's what the whites feared most of all and were strictest about. These students, mostly white, some black, went down there. It was the general wisdom that blacks had been killed for a couple centuries trying to have some power, and it didn't change anything. So why send a bunch of kids down to Mississippi to try to register them? And the wisdom was, and it wasn't cynical, it was real. If a white kid gets killed, then public opinion is going to be so strong that the political motivation would be there for Congress to take action. Lyndon Johnson was president by that time, and he was trying to get through John Kennedy's Civil Rights Bill, which got stalled in Congress. Well, that general wisdom was right, because on June 16, 1964, where two of these young men had gotten the cooperation of a black church in rural Mississippi outside of Philadelphia. That church was burned down and the elders beaten up as they were chased out of there. Beaten up badly. And on June 21, three of them, a trainee came along with them. Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were their names. One black kid, Cheney was black. The others were Jewish boys from New York. Young men, I should say. They were They went to see the burned out church because they felt bad that their activities had led to that. They were arrested by the sheriff and the undersheriff for speeding. You ever heard of passengers being arrested for speeding? They were released that night to what was suspected to be a Ku Klux Klan mob at 1:30 in the morning. They were never heard of again. Public pressure built up, public pressure. Where are these boys? Where are they? What happened to them? What did Mississippi do to these guys? Was the Klan involved? All of that. The FBI was sent in on July 2. Johnson overcame congressional resistance, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted. It was a very important act. It included voting rights, but it didn't have a very good enforcement mechanism to it. I'm a lawyer. It's a law, and I'll just tell you, it wasn't a very effective law, but it did state a principle of American life. Later, the bodies were found. The FBI was sent in to investigate. The FBI hit a blank wall. People wouldn't talk to them. The Civil Rights Division decided, let's have a grand jury. Why? To get people nervous, stir the pot, they called it. That was the phrase. They'd stir the pot, get buzz going in the community among the Klan. And the problem was the Civil Rights Division had no grand jury experience. But the organized crime section, of which I was a member, did. That was one of our techniques. And when I heard that they wanted a grand jury expert, I jumped at it. I want to do this. And I went down with the team. And I'm telling you probably more than we have time for, but when we got down there, the first thing we did was to go down country roads to an area 4 times the size of this room, and it was covered with embers, and there was a chimney sticking up, and in front there was a little cement set of steps that went up to the front porch, and the rest was like embers, and these were like tombstones. And the church had been burned down, and we gathered around it, and the leader of our group, I was number 2 at that time, said, we always stop here when we come down to work. This is our first stop. He said, this is our shrine. And it's just what it was. I can tell you, I remember to this day, it's 50 years ago, standing around and the feeling just coming into us. This is important. This is very important. We have got to succeed. Well, we did. We finally got the first, after 3 weeks in the working in the cotton fields, and 2 weeks with the grand jury in Biloxi, called 125 witnesses. We got the first civil rights conspiracy indictments in American history against some of the participants in the murder. The bodies obviously had been found by that time. And the local judges, federal judges, reversed the indictments, overturned them, dismissed them. It was appealed to the Supreme Court, not by me. I came home to Oregon. I was through. And the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the indictment that I'm happy to say I wrote. And they were prosecuted, and they were brought to justice. That was a milestone. It said that from now on, if there are beatings, if there are false arrests, if there are denials of civil liberties without due process of law, for segregation purposes or for that matter for others, it was going to be the business of the U.S. government to step in and try to correct the abuse. So it was a revolutionary event. It was truly a hinge of history. that was my primary involvement. The second I won't speak so much about. But there was an organization called the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, for short, the Lawyers Committee. And it was stationed in Jackson. It had a cadre of 3 permanent staff, and lawyers were called in as volunteers from all over the country to handle civil rights cases on a volunteer basis. I went down in 1967. There were more, at that time, although it's changed after, at that time there were more lawyers from Oregon that went down than from any other state. Since then, there have been a few more from New York, a few more from California. And by the end of the project, we're the 3rd. And interestingly, and I think this is important for you to know, the lawyers who went down because they were offended at the treatment of human beings, black human beings, by the laws of that society. There were liberals, there were conservatives, there were people I knew as reactionary politically, but they were offended simply that human beings would be treated that way by government. And that's why they went down. People all across the political spectrum. You didn't have to be a liberal. So I went down then, there was a lot of change, and that's a whole set of experiences, and I don't want to take your time.
One of the things Jake didn't mention was back in those days, before murdering someone was a violation of their civil rights, what would happen down there is, I'll give you an example, when Reverend Reeve, a white northern minister, was beaten to death right on the streets of Selma in broad daylight, what they would do is they would serve up an indictment on the people that did it. They would try them the very next day and acquit them. And under the double jeopardy laws, that means then that nothing could ever be done to those people. And that was done time and time again.
Yes.
There's a lot of pictures in the press, and you find them in books. One in particular was the sheriff sitting there with his Wellington boots on, back in his chair. I think he probably had a thing of Silver Cup chewing tobacco. And he's there chewing this, laughing to beat the band. And they were trying him for murder, but he knew what was going to happen.
Those are the guys we indicted.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sheriff Rainey and Deputy Price.
There you go. My memory is, your memory is better than mine. And they, of course, acquitted him, and that's it, the end of the story. But the federal law changed all that and made murdering someone a violation of the civil rights. Okay, now, Jake was dealing at a much higher level than I was. What happened to me is I was going to a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania affiliated with the Church of the Brethren. Church of the Brethren are pacifists, just like the Quakers. Very, very conservative. Ooh, compulsory chapel, compulsory religion classes, coat and tie for dinner, the whole thing. And what happened is that when Martin Luther King's group, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, when they got turned back at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, okay, in Selma in the early spring of 1965, both, I'm going to use a lot of acronyms here, both SCLC and another group called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, put out a call for people all over the country to come down and bear witnesses to what was going on in Selma. Well, we heeded the call. This was in March of 1965, and a bunch of us went down. I was in a red Volkswagen Bug with Pennsylvania license plates. You can imagine how that went down in Alabama. And what happened is no one in leadership positions in the South realized what they had triggered. It was literally, to coin a modern phrase, a tsunami of people. And our college group, just because we happened to be from Pennsylvania, ended up being the second group that showed up. And they knew what was happening, so they waved us off into Montgomery. And we ended up being part of an effort, an action that was organized by SNCC to deliver to George Wallace at the Capitol a petition demanding that he issue a permit for Martin Luther King's march. Now, I say Martin Luther King, but it was a joint effort. James Farmer from CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, was involved. James Foreman, who was head of SNCC at the time, was involved. and so was Martin Luther King's group. And what happened is that literally thousands of people ended up in Montgomery. And with the result, I have a lot of show and tell, and I hope that's okay, is here's what happened. Hang on, this is from a Pittsburgh paper. That's what happened. We called it a police riot. All we were doing was walking down the street with this petition, you know, with lots of names on it. And, oh boy, I'm going to ask Jake, look at me, find me in the picture. Church, school, coat and tie for dinner. That's me right there. I don't know. I have, anybody here know who Buddy Holly was? Seminole rocker. Buddy, they call those glasses Buddy Holly horn rims. And I got them on, I got my white shirt and tie on, and I'm getting clubbed up, down, and whatever. That's what happened. And the fallout from that was caught by a photographer by the name of Charles Moore. You can buy I really urge you to get the library to get this book. Charles Moore won the Pulitzer Prize. He was a photographer for the Birmingham News, and he must have made somebody mad because they gave him covering the civil rights movement as a booby prize for him. Well, he got the last laugh because he became incredibly famous. And he was in Montgomery, easy to do because there he was, and in here, this created a sensation at our school. He took pictures. Now here's the march. Here's when Martin Luther King's group got turned back at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. They were beaten, they were clubbed, they were tear gassed. Luckily nobody died. Luckily. Okay. And when we were down there, just like, what, 4 or 5 days after this. And so they met Martin Luther King's march with this, they met us with this. And the people on the horses, by the way, were deputized, they were Klansmen, thugs, you know, hangers-on. People didn't have jobs. They made them all deputies and gave them horses and said, away you go. Okay, here's more of the march in Selma that happened just a couple days before we were there. But what Charles Moore did is he stayed on, and he ended up in Montgomery with us. These are pictures of Pam Clemson. She's a classmate of mine, okay, at Juniata College, okay? But the picture that just did it for everybody appeared in Life magazine, and it was this one. The man is Galway Connell, National Book Award winner, poet, just died 2 weeks ago. The woman, Harriet Richardson, was a senior at my college. She became Undersecretary of Agriculture in the Carter administration, and she now runs a nonprofit involved with housing for poor and minorities in New York City. And I'll be blunt. What this said to the administration of my college was, these two were an item, and they were. And one is black, and one is white. This sent the administration into the 7th level of hell. They couldn't believe it. This was so scandalous it was beyond belief. And but in any case, you know, this is what happened. This was our first adventure in civil rights. Was this? That was my introduction to civil rights and what was going on in the South. And I'll be real blunt. Everybody in here is old enough. It was a hell of an introduction to civil rights, let me tell you. And so what happened is after the Selma March, which went, and there were people killed even during that. Remember Mrs. Violet Louisa? She was bringing people home from Montgomery to Selma, and just like the movie Easy Riders, guys pull up in a pickup truck next to the 4-lane highway, just that was the end of her. Car goes off, it was all full of people. So it was nasty. It was nasty down there. And we went back to college and formed a group called SCORE, Student Committee on Racial Equality, and started working on civil rights issues in central Pennsylvania, and they were legion. And a lot of the manufacturing small towns had black communities dated back to the Civil War. And not only was, like, for instance, a town called Mount Union a part of the Underground Railroad, okay, is that also they would hire blacks from the South because there wasn't a work pool. They were in the Civil War, they were being killed, okay? And so we started working locally, but what we decided to do was to go back the next summer and we volunteered for a woman who's still alive. She lives in Seattle, Shirley Mesher, who was how do you spell her name? Meszer. She was a field worker for SCLC out of their Selma office. And so we volunteered to go down for vacations in 1966 as part of what was called the SCOPE project. And I can't remember what the acronym stood for, but it was under the auspices of Martin Luther King's group, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And from there, I have fantastic memorabilia. And I just love this stuff. And I don't know, I think if you go to the museum in Birmingham, you'll probably find this stuff, but I've never seen it anywhere. These are handbills and stuff that were passed out. These are like really, really great. And kind of like that guy. And there's the march. That was the march from the year before. And so anyway, we were doing all of this work. Okay, now here comes the real story. We were out there in daylight hours. What's out there? Out in what they call the rurals, Black Belt. We were registering people to vote. I highly recommend this book. It's academic, but boy does it lay it out. The politics of poverty and the politics of race were Byzantine. Okay, that means unbelievably complicated. And everybody was after the black vote. SCLC wanted to go mainstream. Okay. They wanted to work with the Democratic Party. Others said no. They wanted it to be grassroots. And all of this political infighting, which actually worked against the civil rights movement, is all in this book. This woman is a professor at Emory. Okay? But the thing that I'm most proud of is what we were doing down there is in one of her statements. And that is that we managed in Dallas County and Lowndes County over 11,000 people we registered to vote. And this was after...
That's a real achievement.
Oh, I know. And it was nerve-wracking. When we did this stuff, the press was around. I don't know how many, whether you know about the 1968 Democratic Convention, which was held in Chicago, where Mayor Daley turned that whole thing into a police riot. And because of the TV cameras, the kids from, oh boy, SDS, you remember them, the Students for a Democratic Society, and they're chanting, the whole world is watching, the whole world is watching. And the people who were doing all of the beating up didn't realize that. This stuff was being simulcast around the world. This is 1968. Well, the Montgomery stuff, with all the horses and whatnot, there was press everywhere. Well, what we were doing, there was no press. There was nobody. If something happened to us, too bad. We were shot at. We were run off the road. One time, we still don't know why we survived, because we were in a Volkswagen, and a pickup truck came up behind us. We were going to a rural meeting at night at a church in lower Dallas County, and the truck came up and just went boom, right into the back of it. The Volkswagen, just off into the fields. Luckily, it was cotton fields. So, and it was early on, so it wasn't too wet out. And we're in there sitting, the pickup truck sitting on the road with the headlights on, and you could bum, 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 bum. And the funny thing that happened was nothing. To this day, we do not know why. I mean, whatever. So anyway, we're doing this work, and to relieve the tension in the black section of Selma, we would go to a place called the Chicken Shack. It was a black, basically a bar. And we're there, and in comes this guy with a Howard sweatshirt, and he had something I'd never seen before. He had an afro. Never seen one. And he starts talking about politics. And he starts talking about the Black Panthers and something called the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was the next county. And he knew we were civil rights workers because we were there with the SCLC field worker, Phil Gruber. We wouldn't have gone into that place without him. There's no way. And we didn't understand what he was talking about. And the first thing he did, you'll love this story, we were drinking something called short beers. A short beer is in a glass about that high, and it's usually served to people who are drinking straight whiskey out of a shot glass, and it's, you know, and so you have a quick beer to kind of wash it down. And he goes, well, he says, now that you boys, oh, he didn't know who Stokely Carmichael was, he says, now that you boys are working, you know, for the cause here, he said, you need to start drinking serious. And he pulls this thing out of a paper bag, and it was a quart mason jar. And it looked like very weak urine that had some grass in it. And what it was silage drippings. Silage, you know what silage is? That comes out of a silo with corn in it. It's naturally fermented alcohol. Oh, it's not exactly drinking Pabst Blue Ribbon. And he starts pouring silage drippings around for all of us. There's 3 civil rights workers from the college, me, Fred Bailey, and Jim Myers, and this guy, Stokely Carmichael. And he's trying to explain what he was doing in Lowndes County. And he says, I came up with the Black Panther. This is probably the most valuable thing I own. Don't tell my wife that. That was drawn by a very drunk Stokely Carmichael on a bar napkin at the Chicken Shack in Selma, Alabama, trying to explain the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and Black Panthers. Now, why did he do that? Well, the symbol for the Democratic Party of Alabama was a white chicken. And Stokely's going, give me a break, a white chicken. I mean, how wimpy can you get? And he says, I have to symbolize where I'm philosophically heading, which is black power. And so he came up with a Black Panther. A lot better than a white chicken. Notice what it says around the chicken. Can you read it?
White supremacy for the right.
White supremacy forever. That was the formal motto of the Democratic Party of Alabama. And so what happened was after the field work was done, we ended up gravitating up to Stokely's little office. He had a corner of a room up in the SNCC headquarters, which was a floor up from the SCLC offices in Selma. Why did we go up there? Well, I don't mean any disrespect, but Martin Luther King and SCLC was very much establishment. He was working with Nicholas Katzenbaum. He was working at your level. You know, he was working with the feds, trying to affect change from the top down. Now, don't get me wrong. He's marching. He's out there. Okay? But Stokely was trying to do something different. And Stokely's message was this. This is a tough one, especially when you're white and you're down in Alabama and you're putting your life on the line. He basically said, thank you, go home. He says, send money, but go home. He says, if we don't do this ourselves, it won't mean anything. Whew, what a harsh lesson. I mean, here we are, you know, bruised and beaten and scared, you know, to death. And Stokely's saying, but he was edgy. He was edgy. And the greatest symbol of that I ever came across was this, the tale of 2 buttons. Now, the one with the symbolic black and white person is from SCLC. The Black Panther is Stokely Carmichael. 2 totally different attitudes towards not civil rights, but how it should play out. And Stokely, we were up there all the time and talking with him, and he said this little thing that he made up did more to set off the pickup truck crowd with the shotguns in the back than anything he did. And what it is a little thing, and it says before, and it shows all these white people in all the county offices, and you flip it over, and it says after they're all black. Because blacks outnumber whites, I mean like 2 to 1 in Dallas and in Lowndes County. Well, as part of this work coincided with the first anniversary of the March on Montgomery. And here, I don't know how many of these exist. This is a little handbill they put up to advertise this anniversary celebration. Martin Luther King was supposed to be there, but he couldn't make it. And because we were there, we were doing all this field work, we got to meet everybody. I spent a whole afternoon in a small living room like this in the project talking with Dick Gregory, Julian Bond, Stokely Carmichael, while they're holding forth on all their political views, and I'm a 19-year-old student, just sort of sitting there taking it all in, you know, like a sponge. It was an exciting place to be and an exciting time. And, you know, reflecting back on it, I hope our work did stuff. I mean, the fact that, you know, we registered over 11,000 people in 2 counties is got to be something. And by the way, why was Stokely in the corner of the SNCC office right upstairs from the SCLC offices in Selma? And the reason was he kept getting firebombed over in Lowndes County. They threw so many Molotov cocktails into his Lowndes County Freedom Organization office, he finally gave up and he said, we're all going to get killed. So he moved over there because the SCLC offices were right across from City Hall, and he figured that was about a safer place to be as any. You know, park yourself right down in the center of the enemy, and they won't dare firebomb you because you're right there. Stokely had a huge effect on me. And it's the first time I ran into the whole concept of black power. It was the whole time we sat like this and talked night after night in the chicken shack. And his message was basically, this is harsh. This is a harsh message. He says, we don't want anything given to us. We want to earn it. And he says, whites can't come down from the north and give us our rights. They're inalienable, just like it says so. You know, in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, he says they're theirs. And for this to have meaning, he says, we got to grab them. So he says, help us, send money, you know, give us moral support, but we've got to do it. There aren't a lot of people today saying that. Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice, says that. A few other people. It was an incredible message for someone like me back then. And it took a long time for me to reconcile with that.
I hate to interrupt, but we have 1 minute, so.
What is it?
We have 1 minute until we have to.
Let me say something real fast.
All right.
The whole civil rights movement has been collapsed into Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, I think, was a great American, tremendous spokesman. But the civil rights movement was much more. When he gave his I Have a Dream speech, I was about twice as far away as I am from that world. I was right up front for it. I'd worked my way forward. I was a volunteer marshal on the march. And he was inspiring. He was tremendous. But the theme, but what I wanted to point out was there were 200,000 people behind me who were following me and paying attention to his leadership. It was the people, the poor farmers in Neshoba County, Mississippi, where I worked, they were heroes of the Civil Rights Revolution. Hundreds of thousands of people, white and black, the people on the marches, the people on the buses, the people at the coffee counters getting ketchup sprayed on them. The difference was Martin Luther King said, let us do it peacefully, mobilizing blacks and mobilizing the conscience of whites, and we do it together. I did not like Stokely Carmichael's message, because Stokely Carmichael advocating black power was us against them.
Yes, he did.
And I don't believe in the us against them. I believe in the us together. And I still do. I still do. Martin Luther King had the effect of making white people live up to their ideals and their consciences. And nothing could be stronger or more powerful than that. But it was the people behind it that made the movement. And television was really important, because Brown versus Board of Education didn't enforce itself. But when they had the sit-ins at the lunch counters, and when they had the march over the Pettus Bridge, and when they had the Freedom Riders, TV cameras, and the revolution came into American living rooms, and ordinary folks watched it. Before that had never happened.
And the amazing thing is Stokely Carmichael got edged out when Eldridge Cleaver and H. Rap Brown and Angela Davis started the actual Black Panther Party or movement. They saw Stokely Carmichael as being too mild. Shut him out.
Would you mind that when we return, I can take a few pictures of
Sure.
your
Sure.
artifacts?
Whatever you want to see.
All right, thank you.
I don't know whether a bar napkin's appropriate, but I certainly treasure it.
I thought you ought to take the bar napkin Antiques Roadshow. See what you can get for it.
Oh, I can't authenticate it, it's just me.
That's-
You know, I mean, I don't have any certificate.
That's provenance.
Stokely's dead, so,
That's provenance.
yeah, what do you want to take a picture of?
I don't know, I just find it all very
Well, here.
interesting. Well,
This is very dramatic.
Okay. What are we supposed to do now?
This appeared in, actually, surprisingly, one of the better newspapers in this country. Who would have thunk it? The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette really is. Really puts the Oregonian to shame. There it is. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, and,
You got all your questions in? We didn't give you a chance
well, you guys,
to ask your
you answered,
questions.
you answered most of them just by talking. It
Yeah.
was awesome.
you need another one, or is that enough?
When we come back, we can.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.